Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thanks for joining us on this webcast. It's purchase to pay, P2P and accounts payable, depending whether you take the full view or a slightly narrower view. Challenges, enablers, and quick wins. And we have got some specific reference to the PeopleSoft environment. You might wonder why this is PeopleSoft specific. Much of the research we're feeding back here is general, but there are some specific elements for you all using PeopleSoft as your ERP and your financial system. So I hope you find it useful. I have promised to provide this feedback as promptly. I know we're all busy. A lot of people are still closing out the year or kicking off the year. So we're going to deliver this in 30 minutes and maybe a little bit less, so trying to keep it punchy. You've signed up, welcome. And I know there's folks from the US, Europe, and even Asia, so I know it's late in the evening in Asia, so thank you. My name's Dan French. I'm founder and CEO at Consider Solutions. I know many of you. Some of you we are new. I'm your sole presenter or sharer of information today, but I'm also presenting a lot of work done by our research team here at Consider Solutions. They don't all look like that, but there is some advanced technology research going on as well. What I want to do is just share and explore some of these challenges and enablers, and I'm sure many of them will be close to your hearts. I want to think a little bit about PeopleSoft financial systems, financial supply chain management specifics, the ERP, discuss best practices, and share a very specific performance management benchmarking capability that you can get access to free of charge. So this is what we're going to do. It's 30 minutes. I've introduced myself. As we go through this, if you have any questions, please ask them. There is a panel on your GoToWebinar event, on your GoToWebinar page. Please ask any questions as they come up. We'll endeavor to answer them, because it's often good to ask them as you go through if something comes up you're thinking about. And if you have any technical issues, you can use the same panel on your desktop to say what technical issue you have, and one of our folks will help you. So I've introduced what we're trying to do. You know that we've been doing research in the area of purchase to pay and even source to pay, and there's some interesting themes that have come through that definitely resonate with a lot of the folks I've been talking to. We'll talk about those top challenges. We're going to talk about some PeopleSoft specific concerns, talk about best practice and quick wins, and also something for you that might actually make your life easier as we start 2019. And then obviously questions if we have time. So many of you know Consider Solutions, so I'm going to be very brief, but if you don't, we are a firm that focuses on supporting this concept of world-class finance, an aspirational goal, and that's defined on the left-hand side, helping the organizations drive better business results. That's what we're all here to do. Reduce the cost of finance, optimize cash flow, and have better risk management. Those are the things that really characterize world-class finance for us. And on the right-hand side, you see these pillars in this Greek temple. Our activities focus on financial control and compliance, internal controls over financial reporting, broader risk management, enterprise risk management, fraud, waste, error, lots of things in that area. But really, we're talking about process optimization and process transformation today. That's the right-hand pillar here. And all that sits on a foundation of technology and data, without which we can't really get anything done these days. So we need to be have good understandings of all those components. So we're really talking about understanding the P2P process. How do we optimize it today and be ready to transform it tomorrow? As an organization, a lot of the ideas and a lot of the research we have, some of it is obviously stimulated by ourselves, but we're very proud and happy to have these organizations help us. It's just an example of some of the global influences we have from our customer base. And you can see some big names there, and they challenge us every day with how can we improve our processes. So that's enough about us. So we can't look at any process really without thinking a little bit about digital transformation. Everyone's talking about digital, everyone's talking about transformation, and a lot of it is kind of hype. So it's interesting to work out what's really going on. There's fundamental disruption going on, and I know we've always talked about change, but there are some structural changes, not just in how our business is operating, but how our markets behave, our customers are behaving, suppliers, partners, stakeholders, and our employees. And the catalyst for that are technology to an extent, but it's also about data, really. It's about the mobility, volume, and transparency of data and easiness of access to it. So there is a consumer awakening right now, and it's about consumer convenience and about intimacy. So a lot of big businesses that we've always considered as business-to-business businesses are really business-to-consumer businesses now. So just today, I was with one of the world leaders in trucks and buses, and you can't imagine a more business-to-business business than that. And even this organization is realizing that instead of just selling their high capital-intensive assets to large organizations and governments, they're now moving to a service model where they are going to be selling spare space on trucks that are traveling around. So almost like an Airbnb or an Uber for trucking. Now that changes their model completely, because they're going from selling to big businesses to selling to smaller businesses and even consumers. That changes the fundamentals of business. The only reason they're able to do that is the availability and immediacy of data. You can provide instant access to what availability there is, and you can provide that to a market. And this is happening all over the place, whether it's Uber, it's Airbnb, it's Netflix. This is what's going on. As businesses, we are all pushed for reducing costs, reducing cycle times, reducing anything that's negative, and driving up the value, speed, impact, agility, resilience, and transparency of what we do. So we're all under ever more pressure than we were before. And I think one of the interesting things in the whole P2P process and for organizations as a whole is it's no longer enough just to get the results. Our executives and our stakeholders and broader shareholders are much more interested in the how as well as the what we do. So it's now a team game. It's not just our employees, it's supply chain partners, it's everything involved in delivering value to our end customers as a business. They're now scrutinized, and you just have to look at some of the press comment about Apple's manufacturing partners, lots of other examples where people say, that's not quite what we expected. So there's this focus on balanced principal performance. Now you might wonder, what's all that got to do with P2P? But it affects all of us. It affects the nature of processes, affects the nature of how what's expected of us, and the speed with which we're asked to respond. So we've been doing this research for a year or so now about the challenges in driving P2P performance and getting towards excellence, if you like. And the 5 big themes have come out to be alignment, transformation, process, automation, and data and insight. I'm going to talk briefly about those. Now, each one of these, we've got a lot of detail on these, and we've essentially got other webcasts to talk about each of these specifically. But I'm going to give you a sense of these things, and if you've got any specific issues, do drop me an email, because I'll be happy to talk to you about it personally. But alignment. When you think about the P2P process particularly, but I would say any end-to-end process in business, it's very easy for consultants and top management to say we ought to have end-to-end process thinking and end-to-end process governance. But the reality is, in the functional structure of business, in P2P, we've got sourcing and procurement on the left-hand side of the process, if you think about it as a stream. And on the right-hand side, we've got shared services and financial accounting for invoice management and payments. And these report into different functions. They've got business operations in the middle that operate around the world. But the executive priorities are not necessarily completely aligned. And these issues about governance and accountability, the target outcomes that you might ask the chief procurement officer for will be very different to the target outcomes you would ask the head of shared services or the head of finance for. And there's differing views of the importance of efficiency, getting things done fast, and effectiveness, which is doing the right thing. And we all know there's a balance between the two. Just doing the wrong things fast doesn't help anybody. But this issue about different KPIs, different functional silos of the end-to-end process, give us a challenge. And I almost sense, talking to some folks, there's almost some kind of social division where, because we've put some elements of accounts payable into low-cost operations, there's a sense sometimes that the folks who are in the high-cost areas regard what they do as more important than the work they get, perhaps some of the transactional work. Key point is, without that alignment, you've got a big challenge in making the end-to-end process work as well as possible. There are some answers to this, but it's a kind of interesting point. And this is the key point is, it's about the big picture that matters. Whether you're in procurement or accounts payable or in business operations getting stuff done, it's very easy to look down, tunnel vision down that little footpath on the left. But from an end-to-end process point of view, if you really want to drive both efficiency and effectiveness, we've got to get up, get a helicopter view of the whole thing and see what outcomes we want. And a great example here is some feedback based on some work we were doing with one global organization looking at optimizing the P2P process. And of course, many people assume that optimizing P2P process is about creating efficiencies that we can cut down headcount. And whilst P2P transaction efficiency was initially a very highly rated topic, the more they went into this discussion and exploration with the stakeholders and they realized what a common process would deliver, you can see from this pie chart what was really delivered and what executives realized was really important. So they started looking at how to reduce headcount, which is P2P efficiency, and then the biggest impact, the biggest financial impact on the organization was increased contract compliance, which is making sure that these contracts we spend so much and so much time in putting together with key suppliers, we actually get the benefits of those terms when we actually trade with them over the subsequent years. Bringing spend under control, spend visibility, and payment on time, not paying too late and not paying too early. All of those things drove much bigger value than just P2P efficiency. And that's great news if you're challenged by demands for reducing headcount. Obviously, we've got to continue to be more efficient, but it's a bigger picture here. But we can't do that without alignment because we need all stakeholders together. And this can help, this very experience can help bring people together. So we could talk a lot more about alignment, but it's worth thinking about. Transformation, we talk a lot about transformation. And obviously technology is transforming, in inverted commas, a lot of our processes. Here's an example of the end-to-end process of P2P. We've got our classic ERP. We've got some we're building in RPA bots now to connect some of the swivel chair processes. We've got supplier portals. We've got all sorts of things going on. But how much is that really driving the end-to-end efficiency? But I think the point about transformation is that the more and more folks we talk to, there's a concern that transformation is a buzzword, again, touted by consultants and technology suppliers, and sometimes by the C-suite who've been to the latest McKinsey talk. But really, transformation is about a substantial change. It's a metamorphosis. And when we talk about transformation, we've got to work out what we're trying to achieve. And I think transformation is about business model, substantial process change. If we're implementing new technology to drive efficiencies or putting in a new P2P suite, that may or may not be transformation, but it's important for us to be honest with what outcomes we expect. And sometimes transformation is the right answer, and sometimes just optimization is the right answer. Now, sometimes we all know that we need to use these terms to get our business cases accepted, but it's worth thinking about. Are we really doing transformation, or is that just the latest buzzword? Process, end-to-end process. So we know P2P is complex. Now, most of us on this call are probably focusing on the right-hand side, dealing with managing the results of purchase requests and purchase orders in terms of goods receipts, invoices, and payment. That's the right-hand side there. But the end-to-end P2P process starts with demand, sourcing the right suppliers, contracting suppliers, having a sensible purchase request and PO process. And obviously, it's a difference between direct and indirect procurement. But this separation between sourcing, buying, and paying is important to think about. The more we can integrate that, align it across the end-to-end process, the more value the organization gets and our customers get. But even if we're not integrated, it's important to see that end-to-end process and say, okay, I might be really responsible for invoice to pay or purchase to pay. But we see all the different players, organizational units involved, and we at least need to understand how the process works and make sure we've got a good understanding of it and we can help optimize. So again, there's a whole separate discussion on this on one of our other webcasts, but the idea of managing a process as well as defining those end-to-end steps. This is a great mechanism for engaging with senior management about how you want those process outcomes to change, what the outcomes we want from the process, what stakeholders are involved, procurement, sourcing, business operations, payable, shared services, treasury. How do we measure and communicate progress on the process? How do we govern that in terms of an end-to-end process when you have functional units designing a process? Where does the process sit? Obviously, automation, enabling technology, our ERP, our PeopleSoft, and other things, skills, capability, and managing it as a service. So those are some things to think about, because understanding an end-to-end process is definitely a key barrier, or not having that is a key barrier to driving effectiveness. And then obviously, you can't have this conversation without talking about automation. and more intelligent automation. So when we think about automation, it's easy to assume, you know, we're coming from a world where it was all about the ERP, and now we're maturing to much more important things, self-service portals, and we've got robotic process automation and AI. And it's easy to think about that as a linear journey, and maybe, you know, the world of ERPs is something from yesterday. But the evidence is that's not true. There is a very important two dimensions to this. There's a balancing act between automating for efficiency, that's automating tasks. That's where your ERP comes in, it's where some of your EDI and electronic invoicing comes in, it's where some RPA components come in. But it's also, are we making the right decisions? Are we allocating our resources at the right place at the right time? So there's a balance between efficiency and effectiveness. And that's an important thing to work out. Yeah, how do we do that? And how do we use technology for both, rather than just make the process faster, even if we're doing the wrong thing? And there's some insights into that as well. So I don't know about you, but from the folks we talk to, there's a lot of competing priorities, and some are to do with solving problems, or some are to do with solutions bearing gifts. Obviously, how to get the best out of the ERP, how to use, should we be using P2P suites like Ariba and Coupa and others? Do we need a supplier portal to get the suppliers doing self-service work to take load off us? Should we be using, you know, how much e-invoicing we're using, how well is that working, dynamic discounting, how well are we using purchase cards, and then what's the role of RPA, and ultimately what's the role of AI? And there is a sense on that previous chart I showed that sometimes the consultants try to tell us that we're on a road where all the other stuff becomes irrelevant and it's just going to be about robotics and AI, and all the evidence is that just isn't the case. These are all incremental. And it's also important to remember, this is a lovely chart from Gartner, that with new initiatives, and technology is probably the worst culprit in this, this is a classic psychological state we go through, but it's a group psychology. The new technologies come in, we have these very inflated expectations of how they're going to change our world. We move along and we inflate these expectations, and then as we get past that, we start to realize, we start trying to apply the technologies, we realize actually it's a bit harder than we thought, it's not the panacea we thought, and we slip down the trough of disillusionment and then claw battered and bloodied up the slope of enlightenment and eventually get to a plateau of productivity, if we get that far and haven't given up on the way. But it is worth thinking about the technologies, because the technologies we have, so our ERP, for example, is typically on the plateau of productivity, assuming it's been in place for a few years. A lot of the new technologies are coming in the peak of inflated expectations. You've got to make sure you're comparing apples with apples. But I just like that because it helps a lot of conversations about validating what it is we're trying to do. The fifth key point is really about data. We talked initially about transformation, about how data is essential and the central part of why organizations are enabling organizations to change the markets they serve and the business models they operate. And data is very, very powerful. That's no surprise. I mean, Hackett Group, the benchmarking and performance analysis folks, they've got some great analytics around this. Just the organizations that have well-managed data tend to be also those organizations with a lower cost of finance and lower staffing. So when we're looking at how do we drive operating efficiencies, how do we drive process excellence, part of it is also about how do we make sure we're making the best of the data we have. We have got a massive base of data and it's ever increasing, but how do we do that? And of course, Hackett Group is saying, help drive enhanced analytics, reduce cycle times, and so on. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but there's no doubt at all, there's a lot of evidence that managing the data we have is a good thing. So you might remember this character 18 years ago, 17 years ago, and and this was always quite a puzzling comment at the time, but the more I think about it, it's very valid. There's known knowns and there's known unknowns. There's also unknown unknowns, and I think this kind of gets us into the whole data question very well. So again, Gartner Group have helped us think more about process change, and we used to say it was about people, process, and technology, and they've made it very clear here, and I think it's a very simple image, that data is one of the 4 building blocks of process change. Now, what's really interesting in the research we've been doing is what started off as a claim, which I couldn't believe, although I had a slight concern that it might well be true. This claim got reinforced so many times that up to 80% of finance effort is spent acquiring and preparing data for reporting, leaving as little as 20% for value-added analysis and decision-making. And that's frightening, frankly, in today's world. So again, we know that the data is there, but it's probably not in a situation, in a form we can use well. But when we look at the way we're changing processes, next another Hackett slide. This is great, of course. They're talking about digital transformation to help making things Apple easy, as fast as Google, and as customer-centric as Amazon. And those are three great aspirations. And they talk about the key elements, the key support processes, and they put in a number of key elements. But the thing they say that is so key that so few of us are doing is really having smart analytics that help us exploit the data in the process and make the process better, and particularly making the analytics a service, so it's not a technology issue, but a business support issue. So those are some of the five key themes that came out of the research. And as I say, if you're interested in any one of those, drop me an email. My email's at the end of this, and we can have a conversation about it. But they're very, very resonant concerns and common concerns from everyone. Now, PeopleSoft, all of those observations were independent of what ERP people are using. But in the PeopleSoft community, it's kind of interesting that people have often asked me, said, well, we're using PeopleSoft, but we're not quite sure. Should we carry on using it? Should we move to obviously it's owned by Oracle, should we move to Oracle's ERP? And then how do we support new requirements? We've got, what do we do about supplier management, straight-through processing? Should we have an Ariba or a Coupa as well? Should we be using RPA? Should we be using AI? Should we be using blockchain? All of these technologies. And these questions are all valid. And certainly there was a feeling for a while that those people using PeopleSoft felt they were under pressure to move to more, the latest versions of what Oracle had to offer, or even go out to other ERP vendors. And what's really interesting is the world's changed. And I've certainly noticed in the past 2 years, it's changed completely, because you're not alone, because even if you're a user of SAP or Oracle's core ERP, they've got the same concerns, because both those vendors are asking people to change as well, to completely new architectures. Now, the great thing about PeopleSoft is it does the job. It's much simpler than SAP or Oracle. And whilst you still have this question about where do I go next, it's not like other people have any better place to go. So it's just a word of caution, if you like, or a word of optimism, that actually what I've seen in the PeopleSoft PeopleSoft Financials is a very functional, powerful capability to support the operation, support P2P, support financial accounting, support order to cash, and also support shared services. And what's really interesting is what's happening in the world of ERP in general is 10 years ago, people thought the ERP was the all-embracing concept. The ERP would be the top and bottom of the whole organization. It would embrace all processes. And what's happened, partly with the advent of cloud technologies, I think, but people are starting to realize the ERP is definitely not going away at all. In fact, it's getting stronger as a core central point. So that's, again, good news about your use of any ERP that is functionally effective, such as PeopleSoft. But what's interesting now is people are saying, no, the world of future systems is a hub and spoke model. The ERP is a hub of core data and financial processing. And around that, we're going to build specific vendor-specific tools like e-procurement, P2P suites. We're going to build T&E processing. We're going to build supplier portals. We're going to build HR capabilities. We're going to build CRM. We're going to use, we develop things if we have to, but we're going to use RPA where we have to. But these are extensions to the core ERP. And you see that picture of the globally integrated process. If this is happening, irrespective of what ERP you use, this is the thinking that's going on now, that the ERP itself isn't going to solve all our problems. It's going to be a core. And I think that plays somewhat to your situation. So it's worth thinking about that, and possibly being grateful for the situation perhaps not being in the middle of a replacement, because those have had some unpleasant experiences. So there's a growing realization you should explore the new technologies as appropriate, RPA, AI, and all these things, but we've got to get the most of our current technology, and complementary technologies generally across the piece, from all the research we've done and just talking to people, anecdotal stories, complementary technologies do a lot better than big bang displacements. So what are the best practices and quick wins? Well, purchase to pay process. Now, many of you are in the invoice to pay accounts payable, the right-hand side. But that's our vision of how can we enhance the capabilities people have in PeopleSoft and in other systems. But today we're very specifically talking about PeopleSoft. So we can get insight across that end-to-end process, irrespective of the data coming from the systems. Look across using some smart machine learning technologies on a cloud basis, and start giving some real insight that allows us to make day-to-day decisions that are better than the decisions we made before, and help drive, optimize the processes we have today. So what we have produced is a performance benchmarking and P2P analysis capability, is a cloud-based connect and go analytics that gives you insight and allow you to take action immediately. And I'm going to show you a little bit about that very quickly. So here's some examples using this analysis. It takes data straight from PeopleSoft. It takes straight from other ERPs as well. Gives us automatically calculated KPI calculations. There's 8 there. You see the ones highlighted in red are ones which are not so great. So KPI is automatically calculated, so we can compare and contrast performance and see performance improvements. But KPIs aren't enough. We need to work out where do we need to put our attention. This traffic light chart here shows in the current 3 to 4 day period what are the big issues. And here you can see duplicate invoices are red, and invoices without PO also red, and there's some duplicate payments there as well. It's very focused, it's here and now, take some decisions. Only 5 duplicate invoices in this case, only worth 2,000, but let's have a look at them. Also look at where are the overall process exceptions. You see here a summary of some key elements. So purchase orders without purchase requisition. If that's a policy you have, that you should have purchase requisitions, it's important to know and drill down into detail where that's not happening. Again, invoices, the second one here, created on or before a purchase order, means your PO policy isn't working. Again, damages your ability to predict spend. So again, allows us to look at those exceptions in great detail. And we've also got some, using this smart analytics, got some really interesting alerts on duplicate invoices. Not just the classics, and surprisingly, we still get duplicate invoices irrespective of what ERP you use. But we've also got some much smarter alerting here. So you can see here these little clusters of apparently duplicate invoices according to this smart cloud system, but they seem to be completely different vendors, so it doesn't seem right. But when you drill in, you can realize that these different vendors are actually subsidiaries of the same thing. So in this case, Simplex Grinnell is a subsidiary of Tyco Fire and Security, and Physicians Care and Crossroads Urgent Care are both based in the same location and actually the same place. And what we're finding is related entity vendors and related entity billing is causing a lot of problem for some organizations. So here's a way of very quickly being able to flag up invoices that they shouldn't be paid. And it's getting the needle in the haystack here. Then invoice processing errors, looking at trends by what are the problematic vendors, what are the problematic business units or operating companies in our organization. Here we see this HC Supply is one of the most dominant vendors where we're having to keep amending their invoices. Rather than just keep dealing with the processing errors, we can actually talk to the vendor because they are in the high priority and high impact failure rate. Duplicate payments, here we go. This week, 18 duplicate payments have actually been made. We've got to get ahead of this, and this is a way of getting ahead of it. And we can also see even obscure issues here. So here we get a duplicate vendors, but they're different, completely different names, but they're sitting in the same place. And that helps clarify and clean up some of the P2P and AP issues. Looking at vendor master data, what's happened there? That's unusual. Looking at vendor master data, Looking at vendor master data, most organizations have a lot of duplicate vendors, but it's too much of a problem to fix. It becomes a project. What these smart analytics have done have allowed us to prioritize those ones where you've actually got transactional activity. So out of several thousand duplicate vendors here, on the left-hand side, you can see just 90 that have both invoices and payments against them. So 90 duplicate vendors where both duplicates are being used, or maybe multiple duplicates being used. So that allows us to focus time and cut down the issues. Payment terms, how are they affecting working capital? Are we using payment terms that are against our policy? Let's highlight those and let's take some action, elevate them. What about vendor performance summary? How well are we spending by vendor? Or, who are our biggest vendors, and also some of our tail end vendors? Can we look at those and see if there's something we can do to improve things? So, smart analytics hitting these topics. I think I've covered these things, but it's worth bearing in mind we're getting some great feedback on these topics. Something for you, I'm realizing 30 minutes are up, but you've got the opportunity to analyze and benchmark your own P2P performance. Doesn't cost you anything. We will do that free of charge on 3 months data. You get automatic view of KPIs. You'll get instant results from this process-aware analytics. There's no fee, there's no setup, there's no IT effort. It's just, if you've got the aspiration to say, I want to see how I can drive performance out of our P2P and AP process, just need a non-disclosure agreement and the desire to change and improve. If you're interested in talking about that, drop me an email and we can provide the details. Here's some example of what we've seen in the cost saving, some very substantial and conservative cost savings here about eliminating error, waste, and outliers, tuning automation, so some of the data coming in from external systems are not doing what they're meant to, driving automated KPIs, eliminating fraud, and getting better collaboration alignment across the end-to-end process. That's our research. That's what our research tells us. This is a sequence you want to do things. If you get the data insight first, you get better insight into the process, helps you have the conversation with the stakeholders for alignment, the opportunity for transformation or optimization, and a foundation for better transaction automation. That's what we've talked about. It's been 30 minutes. Appreciate your time. Please, if you've got any more questions, pop them in on that Q&A. I will get back to you by email to those questions because I have run out of time. If you want to email me directly, that's my email address, dfrench@consider.biz. If you've got questions, send there. If you're interested in participating in this free benchmark and analysis of your P2P AP process, fire away. Thanks for your time. I'll let you get back to the year-end close and the 2019 start. Thanks a lot.